This conference will now be recorded.
I'm sorry, did anyone say anything? Okay. Now, before we even go ahead and look into what really a virtual machine is, let's understand what a need, I mean, what is really the need for a virtual machine. Now, let's say you're working for an organization. Okay. You need like, some amount of needs, right? Like anything that you do in that particular organization, you would at least need a computer to, work with, because at least in today's world, that is what you really need. So let's imagine that you have 40 different employees in your organization who are basically working for you, and they all need what? Laptops. So let's talk about laptops. So you have like different users in your particular organization who need different machines out here. Now what do you do basically is like, you say, okay, fine, you go to a laptop provider like, let's say, Dell, or let's say Lenovo, or whoever is it that you're tied up with. You say, okay, fine, I will place an order for what? 40 laptops, and I need a configuration for this particular laptop. Now I'm talking about, very importantly, called configuration. Meaning I say that, okay, fine, I need a Windows 10 operating system with, let's say, 8 GB of RAM, with, let's say, 1 TB of hard drive, and so on and so forth, with something like this. I need a configuration something like this, so that my users or the employees of my organization can actually go ahead and start using it, which is great, which is like good to start with. But let's imagine that this configuration is not okay with you. I mean, your employees are complaining of a very slow performance. Your employees are telling that, hey, you know what, 8 GB of RAM isn't sufficient, or 1 terabyte of hard drive is not sufficient. Can we please upgrade it further? You again go to that particular vendor and say, hey, you know what, I am not able to uh, satisfied, I'm not getting satisfied with this particular configuration. Can you please upgrade it? What that vendor would say is that, okay, fine, give me the laptops back, like, one after the other. I'll try upgrading it and giving it out to you. Now let's imagine that that particular vendor is taking at least like about 3 or 4 days to, upgrade all this configuration, reinstall the operating system, reimage your entire thing, and give it to you back again. Now it takes about 3 days, right? I'm talking about 40 employees. I'm talking about 120 days cumulatively. I'm talking about so many hours cumulatively. That is first thing. Second thing, the amount of cost that I'm basically investing in this particular machines, which are physical in nature. That is the second, factor that is associated to it. Third, let's say a new employee joins in, or let's say an employee leaves the organization. Now, what do you do with that particular physical machine? Who do you give it to, or what do you do with that? So, resource optimization. Third thing, this is very common with any kind of a physical machine. Like there are some amount of constraints when you talk about a physical world. Meaning, I say I'll upgrade the first time to, let's say, 16 GB. Even 16 GB is not sufficient for me for my workload, because I'm doing a lot of work on this particular machine. I again go to the vendor and say, you know what, 32 GB, I am not satisfied with 16. Please go ahead and give me 32. The vendor will say, hey, you know what, the motherboard that you're, using, or the laptop that you're using, can only support 8. I'm sorry, can only support 16. I'm sorry, I cannot expand it further. I cannot do that further. Meaning, there is no flexibility when you go for a physical machine. So what we have devised over, let's say, in a period of evolution in the IT industry, is that let's not do this. I mean, why do you want to purchase one machine per an individual? I understand that, but why do we even want to do it? Can we not come up with some kind of a software that can help me create a machine on the cloud, and that machine again can be used by my employees to do the same work what they do, let's say, on, any of the machines? They said, okay, fine, we have something called as a virtual machine concept for that. let's move from a physical infrastructure to, let's say, a virtual infrastructure which practically doesn't have the physical limitations, which practically doesn't have a physical limitation, which generally is flexible, and which generally is not that costly. What you are paying for, let's say 40 machines, you don't have to pay for that. Create a machine, create individual logins on that machine, and give it to your employees. All the employees now can start using the same machine again. Now see how much have I reduced it, or how much of physical infrastructure are we cutting down on? Like, isn't this a very big achievement out there? This is the concept of virtual machine. So something which is virtual, meaning if I talk about virtual machines or virtual network, meaning it is not physical. It is something existing virtually, which is not physical at all. This is good until this point. Like, okay, fine, these machines are expendable, meaning these machines can be used and they can be thrown away if you do not want it, and etc. And you have different purposes what this machine can really solve. This is what is a concept of virtual machine. Great. But is it only to, let's say, perform daily activities like doing Excel or sending out email? Is that the only reason why a virtual machine exists? No, not really at all. The purpose of a virtual machine has grown a lot over, let's say, the entire period of the evolution of cloud. Now, what am I talking really about? Meaning, these machines right now, which are, let's say, running on some operating system out there, are just not used as a consumer base. They're not being used as a consumer base. Rather, they are being used for a business need. And one of the business need, when you, let's say, look at an organization, or look at, let's say, a development team, is called as an application server. It's called as an application server. Now, very simple. Now, normally, guys, if you want to decode this, what application server is, firstly, let's understand what a server is, right? Now, in a very, very normal world, when you go to a hotel and say, hey, you know what, call a server. Now, what does a server do? He just goes to the kitchen, whatever order you place, he'll just give it to you, right? That is actually what a server is in a hotel. Same thing, if you talk about an application server in the IT world, it is going to give you the code, or it is going to give you the application, what, let's say, a developer has created. For example, if I do facebook.com, or if I do google.com, or a matter if I do anything, there is a server which is helping me out to deliver this application over the internet, right? And we also talked about it. All these again are physical servers. Like, it boils down to something called as a physical server. So we have companies like Azure, Amazon Web Services, and all these things who buy this physical server, put it in a data center, and deliver these services like storage, like hardware, and all these things over the internet. And what do you do? A virtual machine does a very simple thing. It just uses the underlying server. So you have a physical server, and I have just given a software which is called a virtual machine, and this uses the underlying server out here and helps you solve your purpose. Now, the entire journey of what we are going to look at is that how can you really create a virtual machine then? Over a cloud, when you're talking about all these things, and how can you really create a virtual machine? And if you create one, then how can you use it? Or by what can you use it? Meaning, how do you do an application server and etc.? Or how do you convert a virtual machine into something else? Guys, are we good with this? Like, any questions still here? Is everyone able to follow what we're really talking about?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, correct.
great. Fine, then this is good enough. And we also spoke about, in our beginning classes about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And guys, if you all recollect, what does virtual machine come under? Is it an IaaS? Is it a PaaS? Is it a SaaS?
Yes.
Yes.
So we're all agreed to that. That is an IaaS, right? Then why is it an IaaS? Thing is that if you look at, let's say, VM, now this is what the layer really looks like. I'm talking about in IaaS, I'm talking about an underlying infrastructure. I am talking about RAM, hard drive, and the operating system only. I am just talking about that only. And how do you manage it? Who does I mean, who takes care of it and all these things? It's everything is you. All these are taken care by you. And you need to add layers like softwares and all these things out. We'll see how do you add that particular layer, what do you do with that layer and all that stuff. We'll look at that. But even before we go there, let's understand what is the architecture or what all you'll be dealing with while creating a virtual machine, which is like very, very important, even to start with. So let's see this. Let's delete this out. Let's reuse this particular board. Now, the first and the foremost component that you will need while creating a virtual machine is a virtual network, which we have spoken yesterday. You will need a virtual network, small or big, whatever it is. You will definitely need a virtual network in place. Let's imagine that I am creating this virtual network into something called as this particular address space, like 192.168.0.0/16. This is the address space. And I'm getting how many? 65,536 addresses out here. Great. The next component that you need is called a subnet, right? So we also created a subnet yesterday. Let me go small. You will need something known as a subnet. And this architecture is going to provide an isolation, meaning it's an isolated compartment under which, inside which, whatever you create is going to be isolated from the world. So what I do is I want to now attach a virtual machine to this. So how can I really attach it? Like what can I really do, or what basically, or what are all the components basically that I right now create to attach this particular virtual network to the subnet? Sorry, to the virtual machine to the subnet. So let me again get my virtual machine out here, and I'll say put this out here. Okay, you're trying to create a virtual machine, and very importantly, a virtual machine doesn't directly get attached to the subnet. Right out of the box, a virtual machine does not right away get attached to a subnet. A virtual machine has something called as a network interface card, also called as a NIC card. A network interface card, also known as a NIC card out here. Anyone basically who's using a machine, whether being physical or virtual, they will have a NIC card. What is it used for? It is used for communication. If I am able to communicate with you all, or I am able to communicate with the internet, it means my network interface card is healthy. Same way, a virtual machine has something known as a network interface card out there. This network interface card will be assigned an IP address, assigned a private IP address. That private IP address will fall under the address space of the subnet in which it is sitting in. Meaning, network interface card is the one which is directly getting attached to a subnet. And this network interface card is attached to a virtual machine. Fine. This network interface card is attached to a virtual machine. This is how it forms a bridge between the subnet and the virtual machine. So network interface card again is nothing but for communication. This is attached to a virtual machine, and this network interface card gets an IP address from the subnet it is under. For example, let's imagine you have a subnet called 192.168.0.0/24. So we spoke about IP exhaustion, right? Meaning you will have 5 IP reserved reserved by Azure. So taking that out, let's imagine the first IP that you have is 192.168.0.5 or 0.4, whatever it is, something like this IP. This will be attached, or this will be given allocated to that particular NIC card, network interface card, and this would be the private IP address of your virtual machine. This would be the private IP address of your virtual machine, meaning whatever is assigned to your NIC card would be the IP of your virtual machine. Okay, when I say it is a private IP address, meaning people from outside this virtual network cannot access it, or applications outside this virtual network cannot access it. It is completely private, it is completely isolated. This is what I mean. Great. You have also created a virtual machine, you also want to store some data, right? That is where something called as disk comes into picture. Something known as disks in Azure actually come into picture. Now let's say for example, this is a disk. And what is this? This disk is used for hosting operating system data and all these things. Can you attach multiple disks? Yes, you can attach multiple disks for data storage and all that stuff, which is great, nice. So we are talking about a virtual machine. We are talking about a NIC card. We're talking about a disk that is attached to it. Now you also want to control what comes inside your virtual machine, meaning what kind of traffic that comes inside your virtual machine and what goes out of your virtual machine. Very, very important. How do you control this traffic? Meaning who can access, how can they access, or rather, what can they really access? Now there is a concept called ports, guys. PORTS. If you want to communicate with this particular virtual machine, you will have something called as ports. We'll see what are the ports and all these things, but as of now, just understand that these are like channels, or these are doors which you can use to establish communication. Great. And how do you control it? With using what you control it? There is a concept called network security groups. In Azure, there is a concept called network security groups, or in short, NSG. This is how it actually looks like. Network security group rules. A set of rules that actually control what traffic comes inside your virtual network and what leaves your virtual network. This can be attached either to a subnet, or to a network interface card. Now, what happens if it is assigned to a subnet? Let's imagine you have 10 virtual machines inside the same subnet. Is it possible? Yes, of course, because this subnet hosts how many? 256 addresses, out of which how many? 251 you can use, meaning you can have 251 virtual machines inside it. And let's say you want to have the same kind of rules for all the 251. You don't have to go individually and attach NIC cards to, let's say, each and every thing out there. You can attach your network security group rule to the subnet directly, and that will take care of how your traffic comes in and how your traffic goes out. This is the entire architecture of a virtual machine, guys. meaning what are everything that you actually go ahead and create and what is everything that you go ahead and create and stuff like that. Now, one thing that I haven't covered out here, one thing that I haven't really told out here is that let's say your virtual machine wants to communicate with the outside world. Why does it want to communicate? Let's say you are hosting an application on this particular virtual machine, like irctc.com, which needs to be accessed by the public out there. Now, can someone come and hit this particular IP address? No, because you are outside this virtual network, you cannot really do it. Then what is the solution? You create something known as a public IP address, which is outside this particular virtual network, but can be attached to a NIC card again. So a NIC card can have a public IP address, will have a private IP address. It will for sure have a private IP address. It may or may not have a public IP address. And this will be the public IP address where your virtual machine can be communicated from. And if someone needs to communicate over this public IP address, meaning if basically if people want to see an irctc.com that is hosted out of it, you need to do what? You need to make sure to add a rule so that people can look into that. How is it? Let's see. Is everyone okay with this explanation? Is everyone able to understand this? What are all the components and everything?
But
Yeah.
Nicode also
Yes.
acts communication, right, with virtual machine.
Exactly. So a NIC card gets attached to your virtual machine, and your virtual machine gets the IPs that are attached to your NIC card. So since NIC card is just a resource that is getting attached to your virtual machine, you cannot directly communicate with it. So what do you do is like you communicate with it using your virtual machine out there. Does it explain, Akila?
Yeah.
Yes, guys. Any questions?
So the best practices would be we need to create two NIC cards for one for public and one for private, or we need to bind both two IPs into the one NIC.
You can bind both the IPs to one particular NIC card. Depends upon what you really want, trying to achieve out there. So if I were you, I would just create one NIC card and give it a public and a private IP. Not a problem. Because I can
Okay.
control it using something called a network security group rule. So I am not concerned about that on, let's say, the security perspective of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's see what are all the things that Azure really offers while you're creating a virtual machine. Firstly, how do you create a virtual machine? So let's firstly, give a brand new resource group so that we can see what is all getting created. So I'll say first VM test, not bothering about the location. I'll say ECS. I'll say create. Got provision, great. Now I'll go ahead and let's say create. And the first option it gives me is that, hey, you know what? Do you want to create a Windows Server 2019 data center? I'll say, okay, fine. Let me go ahead. Let me click on that. This gives me a page to go ahead and let's say create a virtual machine. So let's see what are all the things that are available out here. First thing, subscription, free trial, great. Second thing, resource group, great. Third thing, the name of your virtual machine. I'll say, okay, fine. This is VM1. Great. It says, okay, fine. VM1 is good. Second thing is asking me, what is the location of your virtual machine, right? Meaning from which data center or which server of which data center that you actually want to use. And I'll say, okay, great. I want East US2 because I have zone redundancy and all those options. I'll say East US2. Now it says availability options. Do you want to go for an availability zone or an availability set? Now let's not talk about what availability zone and availability set at this point is. Let's leave it as no redundancy infrastructure required. I'm not really concerned about this option, and this is not a mandatory one. I'm not concerned about it. Fine. Second thing, it's asking me, okay, fine, you are creating a virtual machine, good enough. But in order to interact with that virtual machine, right, you at least need an operating system. So tell me, what kind of an operating system are you looking for? Like, are you a business or are you a consumer? Now, let's imagine that I am a consumer. I am just a very small consumer out there. I can click in this images and I can go for Windows 10 Pro operating system out here. If I am a consumer, but I am right now a business, guys. Okay. I am a business right now who's not only looking to save his data, but to do a lot of more things. Here, the creation portal offers you a lot of images, meaning a lot of operating systems that you can actually choose from. Windows based, Debian, Ubuntu, Red Hat, whatever your need is, you can go with an operating system from here. These are all the images, meaning these are all the operating systems that you can actually install. And you can also say see all images, which will take you to something called as a marketplace, and it'll tell you, hey, you know what? You have so many things that I can offer. Like everything has a cost associated with it. I can give you Windows servers based out of 2019, 16, 12, 8, 7. I can give you those. Or I can give you something like a Red Hat or an Ubuntu server. Ubuntu is nothing but Linux. Or if you want to do something else, I can also have servers for that particular thing out there. So these are all the servers that are all in the offer. Like these are all, let's say, the images that are on the offer. Now, me being a Windows based consumer, I'll say, okay, fine. I want a Windows Server 2019 data center generation 1. I am okay with it. I'll go ahead and say, select that particular image out there, which is great. Azure Spot instance not required at this point. We are good with this. Now it says, what is the size of the operating system that you actually want to go for? Now, guys, very importantly, we are dealing with this layer, right? We are dealing with this particular layer out here, which is the underlying IaaS layer. It's now asking me, hey, okay, fine, you have selected the operating system, which is great. Now tell me, what kind of a hardware do you want? Meaning, how much of RAM, how much of CPU, and all these things. And what Microsoft did is that they categorize all these things into something called series of virtual machines. Like, for example, if I go here, if I say see all sizes, it will tell me, hey, you know what? You have series of virtual machines that are available. For example, if I say it is DS1V2, what am I getting? I am getting one CPU, meaning one core CPU, 3.5 GB of RAM, maximum four data disks, and I am getting a cost of 6,153 rupees if I run it 24/7 a month. But let's imagine your needs are more. You're not okay with two CPUs and you're not okay with this particular RAM. You can also choose from the available options out here. And you have different series, I mean different families basically that you can actually go for. You have B series, you have A series, and etc. Each and everything has its own underlying capabilities and its own monthly cost, its own RAM, and everything else. I've also seen machines which is going to cost you somewhere around lakhs and lakhs of rupees per month. You can also have those machines also. So it's telling me, okay, fine, what do you really want out here? I'll say, okay, fine, I'll go for a DS2 V3 series, which is going to give me two CPUs, 8 GB of RAM, maximum 4 data disks that I can go ahead and attach to it. And I get a temporary storage and all that stuff. And I basically get charged for about 9,877 rupees per month. This is your infrastructure selection. That what kind of a machine that you're actually wanting to create. Can this be changed at a later point in time? Yes. You can scale up or scale down, which is one of the biggest advantages of going ahead and creating a virtual machine out there. The size that you select out here is not static number. You can change it at any point in time. No issues at all. The time to change this out, 2 minutes, just 2 minutes. Now imagine the same thing that you're doing in a physical world. You're trying to go from, let's say, 8 GB to 16 GB. It'll take you at least 3 days because you have to take your motherboard out, you have to put your operating system again, and all that stuff. But with a virtual machine out here, the biggest advantage is flexibility. You can scale out, scale in without any commitments. I'll say, okay, fine, select. Now it's asking me, okay, fine, you are creating a Windows machine, I know that. But for you to log into that machine, can you please give me a username and a password? I'll just say test user, and I'll just say some random password out here. So the password that I usually give is Microsoft-001. MCAPS -001. That really works for me every time. So I'll say Microsoft-001 is my password, test user is my username. And now it is time to go ahead and say, it says, okay, fine, you know what? How can now users interact with this particular machine? Meaning it's asking me, what are the network security group rules that you actually want to go ahead and declare? You can declare it at a later point in time, or you can also go ahead and create it right now. It's telling me that, hey, you know what? I have different port numbers out here. And guys, very commonly asked interview question is that what is the port number for RDP? It is 3389. What is the port number for HTTP? 80. What is the port number for HTTPS? 443. Meaning what happens? Let me say, okay, fine, I don't need any ports at all. I will say I don't need any ports. Let's forget about it right now. I don't want to do anything. I just want to create a machine, which is good enough. Fine. So let's talk about this port once the machine is getting created. Okay. So I'll say great. Just a second. I'll say great. It's just like, when the machine, I just want to create a machine right now. And in the bottom, it's asking is that, hey, you know what? Did you ever purchase a Windows Server license? When it's an organization we're talking about, they will already have licenses that can be used out here. So the cost can be reduced. But I or you guys do not have a licensing. So I'll say I do not have a license. That's okay with me. I'll go ahead and I'll say disks. Now it's asking me, okay, by default, you will get something known as an operating system disk. Where I will install something called as Windows Server 2019. Server 19. I will install this and give it to you. So to install this, I need something called as a storage, right? So I'll say, okay, fine. I'll go ahead and create some kind of a storage for you. And this storage can be of multiple options. What are the multiple options that I'm actually talking about? If I click here, it says, hey, you know what? You can select a premium SSD, a standard SSD, or a standard HDD. What am I really talking about out here? SSD, HDD. We spoken about this already in storage account, guys. Standard storage accounts come with HDD. Premium storage account comes with SSD. What will happen if you go for SSD? That's the rate at which your data is being written and retrieved will be very fast. Meaning the performance of your machine is going to be very fast, but you'll have to pay for that particular price. If you, let's say, go for a premium SSD, if you go for a standard SSD, slightly less. So when you look at this description also, right, it says best for production and performance sensitive workloads. If you're expecting high performance, go for it. If you're expecting not that high performance, okay, fine. I mean, fine kind of performance, go for SSD. If you're just like, testing something, go for HDD. Not critical at all. Just for testing. I'll say, okay, fine. I am good with SSD. I'll go with SSD. Now it's asking you, hey, you know what? This is OS, okay. Do you want to attach any other drive to your computer? Like if you have like data and all that stuff. do you want to attach anything to this particular machine? I can go ahead and say, yes, I want to attach, and that is like, some data disk out here. So we can name a disk called data disk -01 source empty, and I can go ahead and select a size. Right now it is at 1024 GB. I can select a size also to my data disk, 512, 256, 64, whatever it is that you actually want. I'll say okay. I'll say okay, and it says okay, fine. While creating a machine, I will also help you attach a data disk to it. So you will not only get an OS disk, which is by default 127 GB or 128 GB, you'll also get a 1 terabyte hard drive that is attached to your computer. So this is my data selection. Now this is where I am in the architecture. I am selecting my disk. I'm not only telling that I need an OS disk, I am also telling that I need a data disk out here that needs to be attached to my virtual machine. This is optional again. Want it? Good. Don't want it? Great. Not a problem. Now, there is also a concept called managed and unmanaged disk, guys. This is something that we'll be going in a very great detail. So let's not talk about it right now. So right now, just select the disk out here. OS, data, great. Most importantly, networking. We haven't even talked about it, right? It says, hey, you know what? The very important thing that I actually need is a networking out there. Meaning, what would be your virtual network? What would be your subnet? It says, I don't find any virtual network right now in that particular region, or rather, there is like, one virtual network that I just created. You can also go ahead and attach this particular virtual network also. But I'll say, okay, fine, I'm not okay with this particular address space. I'll create a new virtual network, which is called a VM virtual network. I'll say a VM VNet, and I'll say the address space of this VNet is 192.168.0.0/16, and I will say the subnet name is VM subnet, and I will say this is 192.168.0.0/24. So I'm slicing my virtual network into a subnet, which gives me 256 IPs, and I'll say okay. This wizard is also going to go ahead and create a virtual network and an associated subnet to it. You don't have to again create a virtual network and attach it to it. This wizard is going to take care of the entire thing. Great. Now it's asking you, what is your NIC card? I will for now say I just need a basic NIC card. I am okay going with a very basic NIC card. And now it's also asking you, do you want a public IP to it? Like, I see that you're creating a virtual machine. Do you really want a public IP to it? If this is an application server, yes, I want a public IP, or you can also select none. You have an option to select a public IP or none out here. And guys, this public IP and the private IP that is coming from the subnet is going to get attached to your what? NIC card, and the NIC card is going to attach to your virtual machine. So this is where I am, in this layer I am. So I say, it's again, it'll again go and ask you that, hey, you know what, do you want any public ports? You can also change this here. Like you can select multiple ports out here. We'll see how you select and all that stuff. For now, I'll say none. I'm good with this. I'll say management. Management is all about, let's say, do you need boot diagnostics and all these things? Meaning when your system crashes, you need some kind of logs, right? So for that, they'll say, you know what, I'll create a storage account for you. And that particular storage account will have this boot diagnostics and all these things. I'll say, no, I don't want all these things right now. I just want to, let's say, go ahead and create it. I can disable it. Nothing else apart from this. Advanced, not really, not at this point. Tags, identification purpose, review, and create. So the main things that we are actually looking at here while the creation is the basics, disks, networking. These are the three things. Networking decides what your virtual network and your subnet is, and your NIC card is. Disks will give you OS disk and data disk. Basic is all about what is the size of the virtual machine that you're actually going for and all that stuff. It says now, you know what? It is 13 rupees per an hour. Are you okay with it? I'll say, okay, great, I'm okay with it. Can you please go ahead and create me a virtual machine? As in, when I click on it, the creation wizard is going to identify all the inputs that I've given it, and it's now going to start and create resources for me. And this is going to take about 2 to 3 minutes in order for me to provision these all resources. Guys, good with this so far? Any questions?
So we have created a virtual machine that is costing around 9,000 per month approximately.
Right, right.
After that, we added the disks.
Mhm.
So those disks, one is OS disk, another one is data disk. So
Yes.
those two will be charged extra, or those two including that cost?
So the cost that you see in just now, right? Like it's costing you around 13 rupees per an hour.
Okay.
Hello? Yeah, the cost
Yes,
that you've seen just now, 13 rupees per an hour, right? That is
yes.
the total cost of everything. Like all these resources, public IP, disks, all these things together is costing you 13 rupees. Now, if you reduce your, if you don't want your data disk, you delete it. You reduce your operating system, let's say not a premium but a standard. That cost is going to go down. So the 9,000 what you seen on that particular screen is a tentative cost, telling that, hey, you know what, this is a tentative cost that I can give you. But if you let's say go for something additional, I'll also charge you something additional. So the cost that you're looking at on the screen right now while you create it, right? That's the actual cost. 13 per an hour, you calculate along with that. So 13 into 24 into 30. That would be the cost if you run it for 24/7 a day into 30 days. Is that okay, Chandra?
Yes, yes. So yeah, so 13 rupees per hour means it's coming around 9,300 rupees only. So I think that's price.
That's the price. Yes, exactly. So that's how basically your price structure is actually calculated based upon what you're really creating and all that stuff. Okay, guys, are you good with this?
Yes,
Like
and in
anyone
case
has?
if we are using that
Mhm.
machine or not, they will charge it, right?
Or no? So again, that is called a state of a machine. Now, if that machine is running 24/7, that's the cost. If it is not running, if you want to stop it, when you're stopping it for 10 hours, okay, you're saving how much? 130 rupees approximately. So the overall cost will actually come down. So that will be generated in your monthly bill. So if you're only using it, they'll charge it. If you're not using it, if it is in a stopped state, they won't use it. I'm sorry, they won't charge it. Is it okay, Sanjay?
Yes, got it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Now I'll say, okay, fine. My machine got created. Now, before I go into my machine, I'll go into my resource group. My resource group, which started as a blank, has all these resources. Let me identify what are all the resources that got created. Virtual network got created, and inside a virtual network, a subnet would have got created. A NIC card, very, very important. A central piece to all these things got created. A public IP got created and got assigned to this particular NIC card. OS disk got created. Data disk got created. NSGs got created. And finally, my virtual machine got created. This is the exact order of creation, guys. If you look at, let's say, the order in which Microsoft would have processed, right? If you look at the deployment details, the first thing that it's creating is, let's say, in this particular order out there. It's creating a disk, it's creating a public IP address, and then creating an NSG, then basically creating a virtual network, then attaching all these resources to, let's say, a virtual network interface. Then finally, it's giving you your actual resource, which is a virtual machine. So virtual machine in this entire architecture is the last one to get created, and everything else get attached to it, because these are the crucial components for it, right? Now, if I go into my virtual machine, it looks something like this. The overview page will look something like this. And the things that we need to note here is, let's say, the operating system, Windows Server 2019, size, DS2 E3, public IP address. This is nothing but the public IP address that got attached to the NIC card. Private IP address, see, 192.168.0.4. this was one of the IPs that came out of your subnet, and this got attached to, let's say, your NIC card again. Now if I look at, let's say, my virtual network, this is my virtual network out there. It says there is one device that got attached. This device is nothing but your NIC card, network interface. This network interface card will have a public IP and a private IP attached to it, which is being attached to a virtual machine. This is how it is. NIC card is the actual resource that will get assigned to a public IP and private IP. This will be assigned to, let's say, the virtual machine as such, which is like my VM1 right now, which is great. Until this point, I'm good, I'm great. Now the question is, I want to connect to this virtual machine. I want to look into this virtual machine. Then how do I look into this particular virtual machine out there? Now I have a public IP, I have a private IP. Now guys, any thoughts on which IP that I can use to connect to this particular virtual machine?
Public IP.
Public.
Great. Because private IP is something that I cannot access because I am someone who is outside this particular virtual network. I am sitting somewhere here out. I am coming from the outside. I'm trying to connect to this particular virtual machine. And how do I connect to this particular virtual machine? I take this public IP address. I will say, open your machine out here, like the programs, and by default you get something called as a remote desktop. This is an application by default which will be installed on any machine that is running above Windows 7 and all. So I'll say open this up. It says, okay, fine, can you give me the IP of the machine that you want to connect to? I'll say it is 20.97.253. something something something, whatever the IP is. I'll say connect. Now it will try to establish a communication, but it will fail. Guys, can anyone tell me why will this fail?
We are not opened any 3389 port number
Exactly.
on the NSG.
Exactly. Guys, did everyone follow this? Like now it says, hey, you know what? The remote desktop can't connect to the remote computer for the following reasons. The computer might be off, the networking might not be configured and everything. Guys, did everyone follow or did anyone has any questions on this one? Now, if I want to open a port, meaning I want to establish a communication with this virtual machine over something called as a remote desktop connection from my laptop. That is the reason Microsoft has something, or that's the reason Microsoft has something known as RDP, Remote Desktop Port 3389. By default, any Windows machine communicates on that particular port. How can I open it? I'll come down to something known as networking. And here you'll have a set of network rules. By default, they'll get attached. I'll say I want to add an inbound port rule. Now I am dealing with something called as an NSG. Source destination any, not a problem. Service is RDP. Here I'm going ahead and selecting RDP out here. Source destination and all can be anything. Action is I want to allow the action, and we'll talk about what priorities and all that stuff. I'll say port number, just give a number, just give a name to it, and I'll say add. This is called opening up a port for your virtual machine. It'll take a minute and it'll go ahead and attach a rule to your network security groups. And if you refresh this page, you will see probably that particular rule out there. This is how you control what comes in and what goes out. Now I said what comes in, and I declared a port called 3389, which has a priority of 100. Now we'll talk about what priorities are and etc. in a bit. And I'll say outbound rules, meaning how can or with whom can your virtual machine actually communicate. I'll say by default it's okay, I'm good enough. Now if I go ahead and take my public IP out here, and you can also run command and do mstsc. This will also open up. This is a shortcut for remote desktop connection. So it is MSTSC, and now I'll say this particular machine, and it will immediately identify that, hey, you know what, that port is actually open. Now I can establish a communication. Give me your user ID and password. So I'll say user ID is this one, password is this one. I'll say okay. Okay. Just user, just create password. Where is my password? Microsoft -001. Okay, looks like I forgot my password, or looks like my user ID is good. So in this cases, I'll just go and reset my password out here. I'll say test user again, Microsoft -001, Microsoft -001. I'll say update. So generally, if you kind of forget this out, you can also go ahead and update your password out here using this particular portal. And this will take a minute. And after that, you can actually go into your machine. So let's see how that looks like. So this is going to take like a minute to update this out, and it'll reset your configuration and all that stuff. Guys, any questions that I can take while this is happening? Anything that I can take?
NIC card will be for each VM, or it will be like in the subnet?
No, so that is like very important question again. That's a very important thing again. A VM, I mean, one NSG card can be attached to only one particular machine. So it is one NIC to one machine. So it is like a
Okay.
one-to-one mapping out there. Okay.
Okay.
So I said basically I've updated it. So let me try my luck again. Let me see if I got my password right this time. So let me go ahead. Let me say overview. Let me close this out. Let me save this one. MSTC again. Say test user. Say micros. And now it says okay, fine, your password is good. Now just say yes here, and this will open up your machine. You are now connected to a remote machine that is running out of where? EastUS 2, running on what? Windows 2019 server operating system. And if you look at the time zone out here, it's saying 3:26 a.m., right? It's because this machine is running out of what? EastUS 2. It now is reflecting that particular time zone out there. So some concept that way. And now it says, okay, fine, server manager, how do you want to do? What do you want to do with this particular server? What do we want to do with this particular server? That is something that we will discuss when we meet tomorrow. That what exactly or how exactly can I play around with the server? What can I do using this particular server? So the journey is something like this, guys. So there are some features in the virtual machine that we need to look at, like backup and recovery, like high availability and all these things. All these will be followed in the classes that are coming this week. So this week is all going to be about infrastructure as a service and concepts around the virtual machine. Is that okay, guys? Any questions that I can take today?
Yeah, so some small questions here.
Sure.
So can we change the time zone to different time zone in the virtual
No, you
machine?
won't be able to change that because the issue is that this is running out of East US 2, right? And if you change it, it'll go out of sync. I mean, you can do the same date and time settings and you can try to change this out, but highly recommended not to do it. Right now it's like UTC, Universal Central, time. Universal Central Time out there. You can change it to a different time zone altogether. Like it's not restricted, but highly advisable not to do it because the server is actually running from East US 2 and all the components of it is actually synced to that particular time zone. So highly suggestible not to do that.
Okay. During the creation of VM, we created a new user. So
Right.
that will be overwritten by the default administrator account. It is a new account.
No, that is the administrator account. The user that you created, right? That is the administrator account.
Yeah. So there is default administrator account, right, in Windows. So that will be overwritten by this account, or this will
Yes,
be created a
th-
new one.
this this would be the default administrator account. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, this is an IaaS service. And when you're creating an operating system, this is not a Windows particular service, like you have an admin and you can create a user. No, this is the administrator what you get out there. So if you go into the administrator console, you will see the administrator as test user. So the default administrator account will kind of get overwritten. And this is what the administrator account what you get out the box.
Okay. Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
And in real time, can we in these Azure virtual machines, can
Mhm.
we do patching and monitoring with our existing tools, or we'll have separate tools for this?
So you can have tools like you'll have like application insight and all these things, which will be used for patching and monitoring. So you have monitoring and all that section separately out here. So you can use the default tools that are there in the Azure and you can do patching, monitoring and all that stuff.
Okay.
So you don't need any separate tools out there.
And what
For
is
example,
difference between?
sorry. For example, in our organization, around 50% of server in the vCenters, some servers exist in Azure. So can I
Mhm.
use single tool
Yes, you can use
or
a very single, yeah, you can use a single tool and you can monitor them out. You don't need to have like one tool per machine. You can have one single console, one single centralized console, and you can monitor all your machines out there.
okay?
Or what is difference between NIC cards and ports?
So a NIC card is the communication center, like meaning if you only have a NIC card, you will be able to go ahead and communicate with things like out of the world and etc. Like that is a very mandatory resource. But when you talk about NSG rules, it is what kind of a traffic can you control that is coming into your virtual machine. Like whether do you want someone to do a remote desktop? Yes, then go ahead and open a port. On NIC card, you won't get any rule or as such. It'll just give you an IP. It'll just say, hey, you know what? I have assigned an IP to you. Now, how do you want to control an IP? Is being controlled by your network security group rules. Did that answer your question, Akila?
Yeah, yes, but ports.
Exactly. Ports is something that you open on the network security group rule. Meaning, I am trying to do a remote desktop connection to it. I open a port called 3389 on the network security group rule. And that network security group will say, hey, you know what? The user has opened a 3389. Now you are okay to allow him to connect to you. That is a port.
Okay. And in the concept of file share, we use the 445 port, right?
Yeah, correct. In the concept of file share, we use the port
Yeah.
number called 445. Exactly. Any more questions that I can take, guys, before we call it a day? Tomorrow, what we're gonna do is like we're gonna see how to convert this virtual machine into an application server. Like what can you do with this particular virtual machine? How can you convert it into an application server and etc. We are going to talk about that. So what you do today is please go through this video and go through a couple of documentations around, let's say, network security group rules, around, let's say, NIC cards, around, let's say, public IPs and all these things out. And we're going to cover it like in very great detail about what are the features and all these things and how do you, let's say, deploy an application to, let's say, the IIS server and all that stuff. So we good, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, guys, then have a great day ahead. Please try creating a virtual machine. And one very important thing, when you create a virtual machine, please delete it as and when you're done, because that is a resource that is going to cost a lot. So every hour it's going to cost like about 13 rupees or something. So please delete it as and when you're done. So delete the entire resource group as and when you're done. Okay. Okay, guys, and have a great day ahead. And we will meet tomorrow and we'll discuss more on this.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.